The morning started like any other Tuesday for Michael Chen. He grabbed his usual coffee from the corner shop, exchanged pleasantries with Tony the barista, and walked the familiar 3 blocks to the glass tower where he'd worked for the past 15 years. The elevator hummed its way to the 18th floor, and Michael settled into his corner office, ready to tackle another day of budget reports and client meetings. But something felt different today. The hallway conversation stopped when he passed. His assistant Jennifer avoided eye contact when she handed him his messages. Even the cleaning lady, who always smiled and waved, seemed to hurry past his door. Michael shrugged it off. Corporate environments were always filled with strange energy, especially during quarterly reviews. At exactly 10:30 a.m., his phone buzzed. "Michael, please come to my office." Here came the voice of William Harrison, the CEO. The tone was flat, businesslike, lacking the warmth that usually accompanied their interactions. Michael had known Harrison for over a decade. They'd worked on deals together, attended company parties, even played golf a few times. Harrison had been the one to promote him to senior vice president 3 years ago. Walking down the marble hallway to the executive suite, Michael noticed how quiet everything seemed. The usual buzz of office activity felt muted, like someone had turned down the volume on the entire floor. He knocked on Harrison's heavy oak door and heard the familiar, "Come in." Harrison sat behind his massive desk, not looking up from the papers spread before him. 2 other men sat in chairs nearby, one from Human Resources, the other from Legal. Michael's stomach dropped. This wasn't going to be a friendly chat about quarterly projections. "Michael, please sit down," Harrison said, finally looking up. His face was stone cold, nothing like the man who'd laughed at Michael's jokes just last week during the management meeting. "We need to discuss your position here at the company." The next 20 minutes felt like watching his life through someone else's eyes. Budget cuts, they said. Restructuring. The company needed to make difficult decisions to stay competitive in the changing market. Nothing personal, just business. His department was being consolidated with another division. His role was no longer necessary. Michael tried to speak, to ask questions, to understand how 15 years of dedication and results could simply disappear in a conference room on a Tuesday morning. But the words wouldn't come. He sat there nodding mechanically as they explained his severance package, his final day, the transition process for his clients. "You've been a valuable member of our team," Harrison said, though his voice carried no emotion. "We appreciate your contributions over the years." The words felt hollow, like reading from a script. This was the same man who'd shaken his hand enthusiastically just months ago, when Michael had landed their biggest client of the year. The Human Resources representative handed him a manila folder. Inside was his termination letter, printed on the company letterhead he'd seen thousands of times before. But now it felt foreign, cold. The legal language spelled out the end of everything he'd built here. 15 years reduced to 2 pages of corporate speak. Walking back to his office felt like moving underwater. Everything looked the same beige walls, the same motivational posters, the same busy colleagues typing away at their computers, but nothing felt real anymore. His office, which had been his second home for so many years, suddenly looked like someone else's space. The family photos on his desk, the awards on his wall, the coffee mug his daughter had given him for Father's Day. They all seemed like props in a play he was no longer part of. Jennifer was crying when he got back. She'd obviously heard the news through the office grapevine. "I'm so sorry, Michael," she whispered, not trusting her voice to be louder. "This is wrong. Everyone knows how hard you work." But her sympathy, though genuine, couldn't change what had just happened. The afternoon was a blur of packing boxes and saying goodbyes. Colleagues stopped by his office, some offering support, others clearly uncomfortable with the awkwardness of the situation. A few shared their own fears. If it could happen to Michael, it could happen to anyone. The company had never felt less secure. As evening approached and the office began to empty, Michael found himself alone with his thoughts for the first time all day. That's when the full weight of his situation began to settle in. At 42 years old, he was starting over. The mortgage on their suburban home had 12 years left. His son David was a junior in college studying engineering, with 2 more years of tuition ahead. His daughter Lisa had just started her freshman year at the state university. Both kids were doing well, following their dreams, and he'd always been proud to support their education. Then there was Rebecca, his wife of 20 years. 6 months ago, she'd been diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. The medication alone cost $800 a month even with insurance. The specialist visits, the physical therapy, the lifestyle changes they'd had to make. It was all manageable when he had a steady 6-figure salary. But now? The COBRA insurance would be expensive, and he had no idea how long it would take to find another position at his level. Michael looked around his empty office one last time. The walls were bare now, leaving only small holes where his certificates had hung. His computer was already locked out of the system. His business cards would be worthless by tomorrow. 15 years of building relationships, learning the industry, climbing the corporate ladder. All of it felt meaningless now. The building was nearly empty as he made his way to the elevator. But instead of pressing the button for the ground floor, he found himself hitting the button for the roof access. He needed air, space, somewhere to think without the suffocating weight of everything closing in around him. The night security guard barely looked up as Michael flashed his badge, though he realized, with a bitter laugh, that it probably wouldn't work much longer. The roof door was usually locked, but maintenance had been working on the air conditioning units all week, and they'd left it propped open. Stepping out onto the roof, Michael was hit by the cool evening air and the sprawling view of the city below. From 23 floors up, the streets looked like tiny ribbons of light. Cars moved like toys, people walked like ants. Everything that seemed so important and overwhelming at ground level looked small and manageable from up here. But the perspective didn't make his problems any smaller. If anything, the quiet and space made them feel bigger. How was he going to tell Rebecca? How could he explain to his kids that their college funds might be in jeopardy? How do you rebuild a career at 42 in an industry that always seemed to favor younger candidates? Michael walked to the edge of the roof and gripped the safety railing. The metal was cold against his palms. 23 floors below, the evening rush hour was winding down. People were heading home to families, to dinner, to normal lives that hadn't been turned upside down in a conference room that morning. For the first time since sitting in Harrison's office, Michael allowed himself to really feel the full impact of what had happened. The anger, the fear, the overwhelming uncertainty about the future. 15 years of loyalty, and this was how it ended. Alone on a rooftop, wondering how everything had gone so wrong so fast. Michael stood at the edge of the rooftop, his hands gripping the cold metal railing so tightly his knuckles had turned white. The city spread out below him like a carpet of twinkling lights, each one representing someone's life, someone's home, someone's story. He wondered how many of those people down there had faced what he was facing now, how many had watched their carefully built lives crumble in a single afternoon. The wind picked up, cutting through his business suit and making him shiver. He'd been up here for nearly an hour now, replaying every moment of his meeting with Harrison. Had there been signs he'd missed? Were there things he could have done differently? The questions circled in his mind like vultures, offering no answers, only more pain. He pulled out his phone to check the time, 8:47 p.m. Rebecca would be wondering where he was. On normal days, he was home by 7, helping with dinner, asking about her doctor's appointments, listening to her talk about her day working part-time at the local library. Tonight he couldn't face going home, not yet. How could he walk through the front door and pretend everything was normal when their entire world had just shifted? The rooftop door creaked behind him, and Michael turned, expecting to see the security guard coming to tell him the building was closing. Instead, he saw a young woman emerging from the stairwell. She moved slowly, hesitantly, like someone who wasn't quite sure where she was going but knew she couldn't stay where she'd been. At first glance, Michael thought she might be another employee working late, but as she came closer, he realized she was too young, maybe 19 or 20. Her clothes were wrinkled and didn't look like office wear, just a simple hoodie and jeans that had seen better days. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and even in the dim rooftop lighting he could see the exhaustion in her eyes. But what caught his attention most was the obvious curve of her belly. She was pregnant, very pregnant from the looks of it. What was a pregnant teenager doing on the roof of a downtown office building at 9 o'clock at night? Michael watched as she walked slowly across the rooftop, seeming to take in the view just as he had. She moved with the careful, measured steps of someone carrying precious cargo. When she reached the safety barrier, she stopped and looked out at the city below. For a moment they stood there in silence, two strangers sharing the same patch of sky. both lost in their own thoughts. Then, to Michael's growing alarm, the young woman began to climb over the safety railing. His heart jumped into his throat as he watched her swing one leg over the metal barrier, then the other. She was now standing on the narrow concrete ledge that ran along the edge of the building, with nothing but air and a 23-story drop between her and the street below. The wind that had been merely uncomfortable for Michael was now dangerous for someone in her position. "Hey!" Michael called out, his voice cutting through the night air. The woman turned, startled, nearly losing her balance. Michael's stomach lurched as he watched her steady herself against the building. "What are you doing?" She looked at him with wide eyes, like a deer caught in headlights. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The traffic noise from below seemed impossibly far away, and the only sound was the wind whipping around the building's corners. "Don't jump," Michael said, his voice gentler now but firm. He began walking slowly toward her, the way you might approach a frightened animal. "Whatever's wrong, there's got to be another way." The young woman's face crumpled, and he could see tears starting to form in her eyes. "You don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The wind almost carried her words away. "I have nowhere else to go." Michael stopped about 10 feet away from her, close enough to talk, but not so close that he might startle her into doing something irreversible. His own problem suddenly felt very small compared to whatever had brought this pregnant teenager to the edge of a building. "My name's Michael," he said, trying to keep his voice calm and steady. "What's yours?" She hesitated for a moment, as if even sharing her name was giving away too much. "Sophia," she finally said. "Sophia, that's a beautiful name," Michael said. "How far along are you?" She looked down at her belly, one hand moving protectively to cover it. 7 months, she whispered, 7 months. Michael thought about his own children. How excited he and Rebecca had been during both pregnancies. The doctor visits, the ultrasounds, the preparations for bringing new life into the world. It should have been the most exciting time in Sophia's life. Instead, she was standing on a ledge, 23 stories above the ground. "Sophia, I know we don't know each other," Michael said, taking a small step closer, "but I've got 2 kids of my own. And I can tell you right now, whatever's going wrong in your life, that baby doesn't deserve to pay for it." Fresh tears rolled down Sophia's cheeks. "That's just it," she said. "I can't give this baby anything. I can't even take care of myself." The pain in her voice was raw and real, and Michael felt his heart breaking for this young woman he'd never met before tonight. Whatever had brought her to this point, it had to be overwhelming. "Tell me what happened," he said. "Sometimes talking helps." Sophia looked at him suspiciously. "Why do you care? You don't even know me." Michael thought about that question. Why did he care? An hour ago he'd been drowning in his own problems, feeling sorry for himself, wondering how his life had gotten so complicated. Now faced with someone in an even more desperate situation, his own troubles seemed manageable. "Because 20 minutes ago I was standing where you are now," he said honestly. Maybe not literally on that ledge, but in the same dark place, feeling like there was no way out, no hope left. Sophia studied his face, trying to decide if she could trust him. "What changed your mind?" "You did," Michael said simply. "Seeing someone else in pain made me realize that as bad as things are for me, I still have options. I still have people who love me, resources I can use, places I can go for help. Maybe we can figure out some options for you too." The wind gusted again and Sophia swayed slightly. Michael's heart jumped and he took another step forward, his hands ready to reach out if she started to fall. "I'm scared," Sophia whispered, so quietly he almost didn't hear her. "Of course you are," Michael said. "Anyone would be scared. But being scared doesn't mean giving up. Sometimes it means finding the courage to ask for help." For the first time since he'd seen her climb over the railing, Sophia looked directly at him instead of at the street below. In her eyes, he saw something he recognized, the same desperation he'd been feeling all day, but also something else. A tiny spark of hope, like a candle flickering in a dark room. "What kind of help?" she asked. Michael realized he didn't have all the answers. He didn't know what resources were available for pregnant teenagers, didn't know what kind of support systems existed. But for the first time all day, he felt like he had a purpose, something more important than his own problems to focus on. "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but I know there are people out there who specialize in helping women in situations like yours. Social workers, counselors, organizations that help with housing and job training. We just need to find them." Sophia was quiet for a long moment, still standing on that narrow ledge but no longer looking down at the street. You really think there might be options? I know there are, Michael said with more confidence than he felt. But the first step is getting you back on the safe side of that railing. Can you do that for me? Can you climb back over? Sophia nodded slowly, and Michael held his breath as she carefully swung first one leg, then the other, back over the safety barrier. When both her feet were planted firmly on the rooftop, he let out a sigh of relief so deep it made him dizzy. Thank you, he said, and he meant it more than any words he'd ever spoken. Now that Sophia was safely back on the rooftop, Michael felt like he could breathe again. But he also knew this was just the beginning. Getting someone away from the edge was one thing. Helping them find a reason to stay away was something entirely different. He looked around the rooftop and spotted a small bench near the maintenance area where workers probably took their breaks. Come on, he said gently, gesturing toward the bench. Let's sit down and talk properly. You must be exhausted. Sophia nodded, one hand supporting her lower back as she walked. Michael could see she was struggling with the weight of her pregnancy, and he wondered how long it had been since she'd had a proper meal or a good night's sleep. When they reached the bench, she sat down heavily, clearly grateful to be off her feet. When's the last time you ate something? Michael asked, sitting down beside her but leaving enough space so she wouldn't feel crowded. Sophia thought for a moment. This morning, I think. Maybe yesterday morning. The days kind of blur together. She said it matter-of-factly, like going without food was just another part of her routine. Michael's heart clenched. Here was a pregnant woman who hadn't eaten in over 24 hours. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a granola bar, something he'd grabbed from the office kitchen earlier but never got around to eating. Here, he said, offering it to her. It's not much, but it's something. Sophia looked at the granola bar like it was a 5-course meal. She unwrapped it carefully and took small bites, making it last as long as possible. Michael watched her eat and felt ashamed of all the times he'd thrown away leftover lunch or complained about restaurant food not being quite right. Sophia, he said quietly, can you tell me how you ended up here? You don't have to if you don't want to, but sometimes talking helps make sense of things. Sophia finished the granola bar and crumpled the wrapper in her hands. For a long moment, she stared out at the city lights, gathering the courage to share her story. I grew up in Riverside, she began. You know, the nice suburb about 30 minutes from here. My parents have money. Not rich, but comfortable. Big house, nice cars, everything looked perfect from the outside. Michael nodded, encouraging her to continue without pushing. I was supposed to be their perfect daughter, Sophia went on. Good grades, college prep classes, the right friends, the right activities. They had my whole life planned out before I could even walk. Business school, then law school, then marry someone from a good family and give them grandchildren when it was convenient for everyone. She laughed bitterly. I guess I gave them the grandchildren part ahead of schedule. What happened when you told them you were pregnant? Michael asked. Sophia's face darkened. My father didn't speak to me for 3 days. My mother kept asking me how I could do this to them, how I could ruin their reputation in the community. They kept talking about fixing the situation, and when I refused, they gave me an ultimatum. Michael waited, sensing there was more to the story. They said I could either handle things their way or I could handle them on my own. When I chose to keep the baby, they told me I had 24 hours to pack my stuff and leave. My mother actually watched me pack, making sure I didn't take anything too expensive. The cruelty of it shocked Michael. He thought about his own children, how he would move mountains to help them if they were ever in trouble. The idea of throwing his daughter out while she was pregnant was unthinkable. What about the baby's father? He asked. Sophia's laugh was even more bitter this time. Ryan? Oh, he disappeared the minute I told him. Blocked my number, deleted me from social media, the whole thing. Turns out he was only interested in the fun parts of a relationship, not the responsibility parts. So you've been on your own this whole time? For about 3 months now, Sophia said. At first I stayed with friends, but you can only crash on someone's couch for so long before you start to wear out your welcome. Especially when you're pregnant and emotional and throwing up every morning. Michael tried to imagine what the last 3 months had been like for her. 19 years old, pregnant with no family support and no stable place to live. It was a wonder she'd made it this long. I've been living in my car for the past 6 weeks, Sophia continued. It's an old Honda that barely runs, but it's all I have. I park in different places every night, trying to avoid the police. Walmart parking lots, 24-hour gas stations, anywhere they won't tow me. What about work? Have you been able to find a job? Sophia shook her head. Who's going to hire someone who's 7 months pregnant? Even if they don't ask directly, it's pretty obvious, and I don't have any real job skills anyway. I was supposed to go to college, remember? I never learned how to do anything practical. Michael thought about his own privileged position. He'd always had a safety net, family, education, connections. Even losing his job today, devastating as it was, didn't compare to what Sophia was facing. I used to think I was struggling, he said honestly. This morning when I got fired, I felt like my world was ending. I was so focused on my own problems that I couldn't see past them. Sophia looked at him with surprise. You got fired today? Michael nodded. 15 years with the same company, and they let me go because of budget cuts. I've got a mortgage, 2 kids in college, and my wife has medical bills that aren't going away. When I came up here tonight, I was feeling pretty sorry for myself. But you have options, Sophia said. You have experience, education, connections. You'll find another job. You're right, Michael admitted. I do have options. And more importantly, I have people who love me and want to help me succeed. That makes all the difference. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both lost in thought. Michael was beginning to understand something about perspective, about how circumstances could make the same problem seem either manageable or impossible. Sophia, he said finally, what would it look like if things worked out? I mean, if you could design your perfect life right now, what would it include? Sophia was quiet for so long that Michael wondered if she'd heard the question. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft with longing. I'd have a small apartment, nothing fancy, just clean and safe and warm. I'd have a job that paid enough to cover rent and groceries and doctor visits. I'd be able to buy baby clothes and a crib and all the things you need when you bring a new person into the world. She paused, her hand moving to her belly again. I'd take classes at night, maybe at the community college, learn something useful, like accounting or computer skills. I'd save money so my daughter could have opportunities I never had. Your daughter? Sophia smiled for the first time since Michael had met her. I found out last week. It's a girl. I don't have a name picked out yet, but I know she's going to be strong. She's already survived more than most babies have to. The love in Sophia's voice when she talked about her unborn daughter was unmistakable. Despite everything she'd been through, despite the impossible situation she was in, she was already a mother in every way that mattered. That sounds like a beautiful life, Michael said. And you know what? I don't think it's impossible. Difficult, yes. It's going to take work and time and probably some help from other people. But impossible? No. Sophia looked at him skeptically. You really think so? I think you're stronger than you know, Michael said. Look at what you've already survived. 3 months ago, your whole life fell apart and you're still here. You're still fighting for your daughter. That takes incredible strength. Sophia wiped tears from her eyes. Some days I don't feel strong. Some days I feel like I'm barely hanging on. That's normal, Michael assured her. Strong doesn't mean never being scared or never wanting to give up. Strong means keeping going even when you're scared, even when giving up seems easier. The wind had died down and the rooftop felt more peaceful now. The crisis moment had passed, but Michael knew they were just at the beginning of figuring out real solutions. Sophia, I want to help you, he said. I don't have all the answers, and I can't solve everything overnight. But I know there are resources out there, people who specialize in helping women in your situation. Tomorrow we're going to start making some phone calls and finding out what's available. Why would you help me? Sophia asked. You don't even know me. Michael thought about that question. Why was he willing to help a stranger when his own life was in chaos? Because tonight helping you helped me remember who I want to be, he said simply. And because everyone deserves a chance to build the life they dream about, especially when they're willing to work for it. As they sat together on the rooftop bench, Michael found himself studying Sophia's face more carefully. There was something familiar about her features that he couldn't quite place. Maybe it was just that universal quality that pregnant women seem to have, a soft glow despite the hardships she'd been facing. But the more he looked, the more he felt like he'd seen her somewhere before. Sophia, he said carefully. I know this might seem like a strange question, but what's your last name? Sophia hesitated for a moment, as if even sharing that small piece of information might somehow make her more vulnerable. But after everything they'd already talked about, it seemed silly to hold back something so basic. Harrison, she said quietly. Sophia Harrison. Michael felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. The name hit him like a physical blow, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. Harrison, the same Harrison who had fired him just hours ago, the same Harrison whose cold, emotionless voice was still echoing in his ears. The same Harrison who had reduced 15 years of Michael's life to a severance package and a corporate script about restructuring. But it couldn't be the same Harrison, could it? It had to be a coincidence. Harrison was a common enough last name. There were probably hundreds of Harrison families in the city, maybe thousands. The odds of this particular Harrison being connected to his Harrison were slim to none, except as Michael looked at Sophia's face more closely. The resemblance was unmistakable. The same sharp cheekbones, the same piercing blue eyes, the same stubborn set to her jaw. Even the way she tilted her head when she was thinking was identical to a gesture he'd seen countless times in boardroom meetings. Harrison, Michael repeated slowly, trying to keep his voice steady. Your father. What does he do for work? Sophia's expression darkened immediately. He's a businessman, CEO of some company downtown. Why? Michael's mind was reeling. This couldn't be happening. Life couldn't be this cruelly ironic. But as he looked at Sophia's face, he knew without a doubt that she was William Harrison's daughter. The daughter he'd disowned. The daughter he'd thrown out of his life 3 years ago when she'd gotten mixed up with what he'd called the wrong crowd. Michael remembered the whispered conversations around the office water cooler. Harrison's teenage daughter had been arrested for something minor, underage drinking or marijuana possession. No one seemed to remember exactly what. But Harrison had been furious about the embarrassment it had caused him. There had been rumors that he'd completely cut ties with her, that he'd told her she was no longer his daughter if she couldn't behave in a way that reflected well on his reputation. At the time, Michael had thought the rumors were exaggerated. What parent would actually disown their own child over something so minor? Now, sitting next to Sophia and hearing her story, he realized the rumors hadn't been exaggerated at all. If anything, they hadn't captured the full cruelty of what Harrison had done. What company? Michael pressed, though he already knew the answer. Harrison Industries, Sophia said with obvious disgust. Maybe you've heard of it. My father loves to see his name on everything. The building, the company letterhead, the annual reports. His ego is bigger than his heart. Michael felt dizzy. Harrison Industries. The same company where he'd worked for 15 years. The same building they were sitting on top of right now. The same man who had fired him was the father who had abandoned Sophia when she needed him most. The irony was so overwhelming that Michael didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Here he was trying to help the daughter of the man who had just destroyed his career. The man who had shown him no mercy that morning was the same man whose daughter was now depending on Michael's kindness to survive. Sophia, Michael said carefully, when you said your parents live in Riverside, is it the big white house on Maple Street? The one with the circular driveway and the iron gates? Sophia looked at him with surprise. How do you know that? Michael had driven past that house dozens of times over the years. Harrison had thrown several company parties there, and Michael had been invited to most of them. He'd admired the manicured lawns, the expensive cars in the driveway, the obvious wealth and success that the house represented. He'd even mentioned to Rebecca once that maybe someday they could afford something like that. Now, knowing that this same house was where Sophia had grown up, where she'd been thrown out while pregnant and desperate, the mansion seemed less impressive and more like a monument to heartlessness. I think I might know your father, Michael said slowly. Professionally, I mean. I worked for Harrison Industries until this morning. Sophia stared at him in shock. You worked for my father? For 15 years, Michael confirmed. He fired me today. Budget cuts, he said. Nothing personal, just business. The silence that followed was deafening. Sophia was looking at Michael with a mixture of disbelief and something else, maybe recognition that the universe had a twisted sense of humor. Wait, Sophia said slowly. If you worked for him for 15 years, then you must have been at some of those company parties he used to throw. At the house, Michael nodded. Several of them, yes. Then you might have seen me, Sophia realized. I used to help serve drinks sometimes when I was in high school. My father said it was good for me to learn the value of work, even though he never paid me for it. Michael tried to remember. There had been several young people at those parties, probably Harrison's kids or their friends, helping with coats and drinks and cleanup. He'd always assumed they were hired help, not family members. The idea that Harrison would make his own daughter work as unpaid servant at his business parties was somehow even worse than everything else Sophia had told him. "You probably don't remember me," Sophia continued. "I was just another face in the crowd. But I remember some of the guests. There was this one man who was always really polite to the help, who actually said please and thank you when we brought him drinks. Most of the other executives acted like we were invisible, but this one guy always treated us like real people." Michael's heart sank as he realized she might be talking about him. "What did he look like?" "Asian American, maybe in his 40s. Always wore really nice suits, but not in a flashy way. He had this kind smile and he talked to my father like they were friends, not just business partners. It was definitely him." Michael remembered making an effort to be polite to the young people working at those parties. Partly because it was the right thing to do, and partly because he knew what it was like to work service jobs when he was younger. He'd never imagined that one of those teenagers was Harrison's own daughter, forced to serve drinks at her father's business functions. "That was me," Michael admitted quietly. Sophia looked at him with wonder. "The man who was kind to me at those parties is the same man who just talked me off a ledge?" "I guess so," Michael said. "And the man who fired you this morning is the same man who threw me out when I got pregnant?" "It seems that way." They sat in silence for several minutes, both trying to process the incredible coincidence that had brought them together. Michael was struggling with the realization that he was now committed to helping the daughter of the man who had just ruined his life. Part of him wanted to feel angry about it, wanted to see some kind of cosmic justice in the situation, but looking at Sophia, seeing her genuine need and the life growing inside her, he couldn't muster any resentment toward her for her father's actions. "Does this change things?" Sophia asked quietly. "Now that you know who my father is?" Michael considered the question seriously. Did it change things? His first instinct was to say no, that Sophia wasn't responsible for her father's choices. But he'd be lying if he said the revelation hadn't complicated his feelings about the situation. "It makes it more complicated," he said honestly. "I won't lie to you about that. This morning your father looked me in the eye and destroyed my career without showing any emotion at all. Finding out that you're his daughter brings up a lot of feelings I'm still trying to sort through." Sophia's face fell. "I understand if you don't want to help me anymore. I wouldn't blame you." "No," Michael said firmly. "That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that this situation is bigger than either of us realized. But you're not your father, Sophia. You're not responsible for the choices he's made, and you don't deserve to suffer because of them." "But doesn't it feel weird?" Sophia pressed. "Helping the daughter of someone who just hurt you so badly?" Michael thought about it for a moment. "You know what? Maybe it does feel weird, but it also feels right. Your father threw us both away today. You 3 years ago, me this morning. Maybe we were meant to find each other. Maybe we can help each other in ways that have nothing to do with him." Sophia smiled for the second time that evening. "When you put it like that, it almost sounds like fate." "Maybe it is," Michael said. "Or maybe it's just proof that the world is smaller than we think it is. Either way, I meant what I said before. I want to help you build the life you described. And now I have even more reason to make sure you succeed." "What do you mean?" Michael grinned. "Because the best revenge against someone who's written you off is to prove them wrong. Your father thinks you're worthless and he thinks I'm disposable. I think we should prove him wrong on both counts." The next morning, Michael woke up with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. After their conversation on the rooftop, he'd driven Sophia to a nearby 24-hour diner, where they'd continued talking over coffee and pie until almost midnight. He'd learned more about her dreams, her fears, and her determination to build a better life for her daughter. By the time he'd helped her find a safe motel room for the night, paying for a week in advance despite his own uncertain financial situation, Michael knew exactly what he needed to do. He started by calling his wife Rebecca. The conversation was one of the hardest he'd ever had. Telling her about losing his job was difficult enough, but explaining why he'd committed to helping a pregnant teenager, who happened to be Harrison's daughter, took even more courage. "Let me get this straight," Rebecca said after he'd told her the whole story. "The man who fired you yesterday has a daughter who's been living in her car and you want to help her?" "I know it sounds crazy," Michael admitted. "But Rebecca, you should have seen her. She's just a kid. And she's trying so hard to do the right thing for her baby. Her own family threw her away like she was garbage." Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. Michael held his breath, knowing that his marriage could depend on how she responded to this news. "What kind of help are we talking about?" she finally asked. "I was thinking she could stay in the guest room for a few weeks just until we can find her something more permanent, and maybe I could use some of my severance pay to help her get started with a job training program or community college classes." "Michael," Rebecca said gently, "we're not exactly in a position to be supporting another person right now. My medical bills aren't going away, and we have no idea how long it'll take you to find another job." Michael knew she was right, but he also knew he couldn't walk away from Sophia now. "I understand the financial risk, but I keep thinking about David and Lisa. What if one of our kids was in Sophia's situation? Wouldn't we hope that some stranger would step up to help them?" That argument seemed to resonate with Rebecca. After another long pause, she sighed. "Okay, but we set boundaries. A few weeks, not months. And she has to be actively working toward independence, not just taking advantage of our help." Michael felt a wave of relief and love for his wife. Even facing their own crisis, she was willing to open their home to someone in need. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Michael threw himself into helping Sophia with the same energy he'd once devoted to climbing the corporate ladder. He spent hours on the phone, researching programs for young mothers, job training opportunities, and affordable housing options. He discovered a whole network of organizations dedicated to helping women in situations exactly like Sophia's. Through a local nonprofit called New Beginnings, Sophia was able to enroll in a program that combined job training with support services for pregnant women and new mothers. The program would teach her basic office skills, help her earn her GED, and provide childcare once the baby was born. Even better, they had connections with employers who were specifically committed to hiring program graduates. While Sophia was getting her life organized, Michael was discovering something unexpected about his own situation. Instead of desperately applying for executive positions at other corporations, he found himself drawn to the nonprofit world where Sophia was receiving help. These organizations were doing incredible work with limited resources, and many of them needed people with business experience to help them operate more efficiently. When the director of New Beginnings mentioned that they were looking for a part-time consultant to help streamline their operations, Michael offered his services. The pay was a fraction of what he'd earned at Harrison Industries, but the work felt meaningful in a way his old job never had. "I can't believe you're considering this," Rebecca said one evening as they discussed his potential career change. "You spent 15 years building expertise in corporate finance, and now you want to throw it all away to work for a nonprofit?" "I'm not throwing anything away," Michael explained. "I'm using the same skills just for a different purpose. And honestly, I feel more energized about this work than I've felt about anything in years." Rebecca studied his face. "You really mean that, don't you?" "I do. These organizations are doing important work, but they're struggling because they don't have the business expertise to maximize their impact. I could help them serve more people, raise more money, operate more efficiently. It feels like a way to use my experience for something that actually matters." By Sophia's 8th month of pregnancy, she had moved into a small studio apartment that New Beginnings had helped her secure. It wasn't the spacious place she dreamed about, but it was clean, safe, and affordable. She'd completed her GED and was excelling in her job training program. More importantly, she'd found her confidence again. Michael had become something between a mentor and a surrogate father figure to Sophia. He helped her practice for job interviews, drove her to doctor appointments when her old car broke down, and spent hours helping her research everything from cribs to child development. Rebecca had warmed to Sophia too, sharing advice about pregnancy and offering emotional support during the difficult final weeks. The day Sophia went into labor, Michael was in his new office at New Beginnings, working on a grant proposal that could fund their expansion into 3 new neighborhoods. His phone rang at 2:17 in the afternoon. "Michael," Sophia's voice was tight with pain but filled with excitement. "I think it's time." Michael dropped everything and drove Sophia to the hospital, calling Rebecca on the way to let her know what was happening. The next 14 hours were a blur of waiting, worrying, and supporting Sophia through the most difficult experience of her young life. At 4:32 a.m., Sophia's daughter made her entrance into the world. She was small but healthy, with a powerful set of lungs and her mother's determined expression. When the nurse placed the baby in Sophia's arms, both Sophia and Michael started crying. "She's perfect," Sophia whispered. staring down at her daughter with wonder. "Look at her, Michael. She's absolutely perfect." Michael couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. This tiny person represented hope, new beginnings, and the power of choosing love over fear. She was proof that Sophia's decision to keep fighting, despite everything she'd been through, had been the right one. "Have you picked a name?" he asked when he could finally trust his voice. Sophia looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "Hope," she said simply. "Her name is Hope." 3 months later, Michael got a call that he'd been both expecting and dreading. William Harrison was on the line. "Michael." Harrison's voice was as cold and businesslike as ever. "I understand you've been involved with my daughter." "Sophia asked me not to contact you," Michael replied carefully. "But yes, I've been helping her. I want to see my granddaughter." Michael was quiet for a moment, thinking about everything Sophia had told him about her father's rejection. "That's not my decision to make. If you want to see Hope, you'll need to talk to Sophia directly, and you'll need to be prepared to apologize for the way you've treated her." "I don't apologize for my decisions," Harrison said stiffly, "but I'm willing to discuss providing financial support for the child." "Sophia doesn't want your money," Michael said. "She wants a father who loves her unconditionally. If you can't offer that, then you have nothing she needs." The conversation ended there, with Harrison hanging up without another word. Michael never found out if Harrison ever tried to contact Sophia directly, but he knew that if he did, Sophia was strong enough now to make her own decisions about what kind of relationship, if any, she wanted with her father. 6 months after Hope's birth, Sophia graduated from the New Beginnings program and started working full-time as an administrative assistant at a local medical practice. She was taking night classes at the community college, working toward an associate degree in business administration. Her small apartment was filled with baby toys, textbooks, and the quiet satisfaction of a life being built, one careful step at a time. Michael's consulting work had grown into a full-time position as executive director of New Beginnings. The pay was still less than half of what he'd earned at Harrison Industries, but his job satisfaction was immeasurable. He was helping organizations across the city become more effective, which meant they could help more people like Sophia. On Hope's first birthday, Sophia asked Michael to be her daughter's godfather. The ceremony was small, just Sophia, Hope, Michael, Rebecca, and a few friends from Sophia's job training program. But it felt more meaningful than any of the corporate events Michael had attended during his previous career. As he held Hope during the ceremony, Michael reflected on how much his life had changed since that night on the rooftop. Losing his job at Harrison Industries had felt like the end of the world, but it had actually been the beginning of a more purposeful life. Helping Sophia had reminded him that success wasn't just about climbing ladders and accumulating wealth. It was about using your abilities to make a positive difference in the world. Sophia had transformed too. The scared, desperate teenager he'd met on the rooftop had become a confident young woman who was building exactly the life she'd dreamed about. She was supporting herself and her daughter, pursuing her education and serving as a role model.